Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. More than 70 people killed in twin explosions in Iran on the 4th anniversary of the assassination of a top general. Fears of a wider escalation in the Middle East after the killing of a top Hamas leader in Lebanon. The United Nations urges restraint. Death toll rises after Japan's New Year's Day earthquake, with rescuers facing heavy rain and aftershocks. And the longest ever strike in the history of Britain's health service. Junior doctors in England begin a 6-day walkout. We begin with breaking news. Iranian officials say that more than 70 people have been killed in twin explosions in the country. The blasts took place near the grave of assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. A ceremony was underway to mark the 4th anniversary of his death. Soleimani was killed by a US drone strike ordered by former President Donald Trump. Regional leaders say the attacks were carried out by terrorists without giving further details. And we'll be in Tehran for more on that story later in the programme. There are fears that the conflict in the Middle East could widen after a Hamas deputy leader was assassinated in Lebanon. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied responsibility for a drone strike on a residential area of Beirut on Tuesday, in which Salah al-Aruri and 6 other Hamas members were killed. But an Israeli government spokesperson has described it as a surgical strike. Lebanese armed group Hezbollah says the attack will not pass without punishment, while the United Nations says it's deeply concerned about a possible escalation. Hamas has called the killing a terrorist act.
We affirm that the assassination by the Zionist occupation of the great brother and national fighting leader Sheikh Salah al-Aruri and his brothers of the movement's leadership and teams on the Lebanese lands is a complete terrorist act, a violation of Lebanon's sovereignty and expansion of Israel's hostility against our people and nation. The Zionist Nazi occupation is responsible for its repercussions.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent in central Gaza, Noor Harazin. So, Noor, what's the reaction been in Gaza to the killing of this deputy Hamas leader?
Well, actually, Palestinians here on the ground, Gazans, were shocked about this news. Shortly after the official announcement of the killing of Saleh al-Aruri, the Ismail Haniyeh, who is Hamas's chairman, who is now residing in Qatar, he went out in a televised statement. He talked about the al-Aruri. He called upon the Palestinians here in Gaza to be steadfast, to be patient, and that the resistance movement here in Gaza is strong in a way to support the people of Gaza, because people here actually on the ground do think that this will take a turn in the conflict, not only in Gaza but also in the region. At the same time, there is a strike in West Bank, in several cities around the West Bank, in Hebron, in Nablus, in Ramallah. General strike. Shops are closed, stores, schools, clinics. So, yes, Palestinians around Palestine here in Gaza and also in the West Bank are taking some stands after the assassination of al-Aruri, because many Palestinians take him as an idol.
And Noor, what's been happening with Israeli strikes across southern and central Gaza?
Well, yes, the Israeli airstrikes and bombings continue in Gaza. The Israeli military and the Israeli troops have withdrawn from northern Gaza. However, they're still controlling some areas in East Jabalia refugee camp. Most of the Israeli airstrikes and Israeli bombings were on southern Gaza in Khan Yunis and Rafah, also in middle Gaza in Al Bureij refugee camp and the Al Maghazi refugee camp. Just half an hour ago, actually, there was several Israeli airstrikes strikes on the entrance of the Al Maghazi refugee camp, which is such a densely populated area. People were there gathering. There is vendors, there is displaced people who sat their tents there to take refuge in the Al Maghazi refugee camp. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, here inside the Shuhada Al-Aqsa hospital, 5 people were killed. Among them are women and children. At the same time, there were several Israeli strikes on the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, specifically in Hayy al-Zuhur neighborhood, which is also a refugee camp, such a densely populated area with hundreds of families that are taking shelter there.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Gaza. That's the view from Gaza. Let's head to Israel now and talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. So, Trent, what's Israel saying about the killing of this deputy leader from Hamas?
Well, Robin, Israel is not officially claiming responsibility, but we do know that from the Israelis' perspective, Salah al-Aruri was not just a deputy leader of Hamas, but was a man deeply involved in its military affairs and was even touted as a potential future leader of the group. Now, we know that despite no official claim of carrying out this strike, Israel has made no secret in recent months that regardless of where Hamas leadership is located in the world, it would be hunting them down, and it would certainly appear from what we're seeing in Beirut that they may have just acted on that threat. But all eyes now really are just on the reaction. This will strike right at the core of many of those Iranian-backed groups which consider Israel their enemy. I think most worrisome for the Israelis is the Lebanon-based Hezbollah group. They have vowed retaliation, and that is a vow coming from an organisation that we know has around 150,000 missiles and rockets within its arsenal. For that reason, the Israeli army has been placed on a state of high readiness along the northern border with Lebanon, but it would certainly appear, based on what we've seen, that the arena of this conflict has now expanded beyond Gaza to include Beirut, and with it, the risk of escalation or miscalculation has grown even further.
And Trent, there have been warnings to Israel from both France and the United States over its plans to potentially resettle people from Gaza in third countries.
Yeah, I mean, the US and France and others are responding very negatively to some of these public statements which we're now getting from members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government when it comes to what happens after this war comes to an end. Let me just give you a flavour of some of the statements which are being made regarding the resettlement of Palestinians. The intelligence minister has said in recent days that voluntary migration is the best and most realistic program for when the fighting ends. The interior security minister has said the war gives an opportunity to encourage migration of residents of Gaza to other parts of the world. And the finance minister here has said that there is broad support in Israel for the voluntary emigration of Gaza Arabs and their absorption into other countries. He didn't provide any source of that alleged broad support, but nevertheless, we know that those types of statements are being slammed, even by some of Israel's closest allies. The US has called them inflammatory and irresponsible. Paris using similar rhetoric. And I will just read to you a very brief statement I've got in the last few minutes from the German Foreign Ministry. It says Berlin rejects with all clarity the unhelpful remarks by Israeli government ministers. Our position is clear. There must neither be any expulsions or any territorial reduction from the Gaza Strip.
Trent, thank you very much. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Tel Aviv. The president of one of the world's leading universities has resigned. Harvard's Claudine Gay faced criticism over her comments about anti-Semitism on campus. She was also accused of plagiarising some of her academic work. Dr. Gay, who was Harvard's first black president, has served just 6 months in the job. She said her decision to step down had been difficult beyond words. Turkey has arrested 34 people accused of spying for Israel. Intelligence officials say dozens of individuals were targeted in raids in Istanbul and 7 other provinces, but some had fled abroad. Suspects are accused of planning the assault or kidnap of foreign nationals living in Turkey, as well as spreading fake news and carrying out robberies. Turkey says it will not allow 2 former Royal Navy ships intended for Ukraine to pass through its waters. The UK donated the ships to Kyiv to boost their sea operations in the conflict with Russia. But Ankara says movement of the vessels will violate an international pact limiting the passage of military ships through the Straits. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. China offers support as rescuers in Japan work to find more survivors after Monday's strong earthquakes.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. More than 100 people are killed in twin explosions in Iran on the 4th anniversary of the assassination of a top general. And fears of a wider escalation in the Middle East after the killing of a senior Hamas leader in Lebanon. The United Nations urges restraint. The death toll from the earthquake that hit Japan on New Year's Day has risen to at least 73 people. Aftershocks are continuing after the 7.6 magnitude quake. Authorities have warned of landslides and heavy rain as rescuers try and search for survivors. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has offered condolences to those affected and says China is ready to provide support. Well, our correspondent Chris Gilbert is in Tokyo. So, Chris, we're now seeing freezing temperatures and heavy rain as rescuers still try to find more survivors.
That's right. I mean, the Prime Minister said more than 24 hours ago it was a race against the clock to find those survivors, and now it seems as though the time is running out. It's now about 55 hours since the earthquake, and experts are saying, you know, it's the 72-hour mark where things start to get desperate. Hope is not given, or is not all lost yet, and rescuers are really ramping up their efforts. But as you mentioned, the adverse weather is taking a toll. It is a mountainous region. It is an isolated region with very small roads through valleys and mountain passes, and mudslides and landslides are only worsening the already poor damaged conditions of the road to access these places. People have been found wandering along the roads from their villages, trying to get word to their loved ones in the outside world that they are okay or that help is needed. That is the situation that Japan is faced with at the moment. The government says it still doesn't know the extent of the devastation and damage inside that mountainous, hilly area. But what we do know is, as you mentioned, the 73 deaths. We know that towns like Suzu have had 90% of the buildings collapsed. That's a town of about 5,000 households. We know that people in Wajima town in the area are melting snow for drinking water, as water is an inconsistent supply. 33,000 people in evacuation centres, and the government is warning of a prolonged evacuation period for those people. So it's very much the midst of a search and rescue operation, and still a lot of uncertainty for everyone.
And Chris, an investigation's now been opened into that collision of a passenger jet and a Coast Guard plane at Tokyo Airport.
Yeah, it's been an active 2 days to start the year for Japan, hasn't it? And that investigation is turning around some interesting results already. That investigation is by the authorities in Japan and experts from France and the UK. And what that effectively has said, according to local broadcaster NHK, is that the Japan Airlines claims that it had received the green light to land on the tarmac and that it was a normal landing procedure. That stacks up according to voice recordings from inside the control tower, but there are conflicting reports about how the Bombardier-8, the Coast Guard plane, ended up on the runway at the same time. The Coast Guard is saying that it received the green light to also enter the runway, but according to NHK, voice recordings from inside the control tower say no, it was told to hold short. And so experts are saying there is a lot of evidence available due to the nature of the crash. There's the physical evidence, there's the black boxes to extract, there are witness reports, there's radar data, there's forensics available. So it will be a thorough investigation to determine what exactly happened. It's going to take days, if not weeks from here, but answers are certainly going to come forward, and potentially some are saying maybe even prosecutions.
Chris, thank you very much. Our correspondent Chris Gilbert in Tokyo. Let's return now to the news of the assassination of the Hamas deputy leader in Lebanon. We can talk to Colin Clark, who's Director of Policy and Research at the Soufan Group, a global intelligence and security firm. Good to see you, Colin. Welcome back to the programme. Hezbollah are saying this assassination won't go unpunished. Is it now inevitable that this conflict will escalate?
It certainly seems so, at least in the short term. Big speech today by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, where we should get a hint of what Hezbollah is prepared to do. Some speculate potential drones and or long-range missile strikes into cities like Tel Aviv.
And this attack actually took place in Beirut, didn't it? In the capital. Aside from what Hezbollah might do, will Lebanon itself feel that it has to react in some way?
Well, Lebanon is really constrained here. They're looking for stability, but again, they have Hezbollah on its soil, a state within a state, a terrorist organization that's dragged the country into war once before, notably in 2006, when Hezbollah fought a 33-day war against Israel. And Lebanon as a society, as a country, suffered significantly with damage of infrastructure and civilian deaths. So there's really a lot of tension in the region, really from all corners, as we see Iranian proxies stepping up their attacks on Israel.
So what could this mean for the wider region and for the conflict more broadly?
Well, it suggests the potential for real spillover violence and dragging in other actors, including highly capable actors like Hezbollah. It also brings the shadow war between Israel and Iran a little bit closer to the surface. Layered on top of that, there was a major attack against the shrine of Qasem Soleimani in Iran today. A lot of speculation of who is behind that. So Iran kind of feeling a taste of its own medicine, right? It sponsors terrorism throughout the region. It's now the victim of a terrorist attack. What it all adds up to is heightened instability, which only means, worse things for the Middle East.
And what about the loss of this particular man, Saleh al-Aruri? How damaging is it for Hamas to lose him at this time?
It's a big loss. He was a conduit to the regime in Tehran, one of the kind of masterminds of the Qassam Brigades, a founding member, a very high-ranking Hamas member. And it's also a signal to other Hamas members, wherever they are in the region, that, they could be next. And so this could be the beginning of a targeted assassination campaign by the Israelis, which they've conducted before. So again, kind of regions on a knife's edge, a lot of potential for a miscalculation, which would only raise the stakes further.
So it sounds like everyone's holding their breath here. What does it mean for the likelihood of any potential more peace talks at this stage?
It means that, peace talks that were already quite precarious could be shelved, at least temporarily. I think, the elephant in the room here is still the issue of the hostages, which are still being held in Gaza. The Israeli government's facing a lot of pressure domestically to get those hostages home. And so while there's a great need for negotiations, all of the kind of kinetic action and violence makes that more difficult for all sides involved.
Colin, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Colin Clark from the Soufan Group. Junior doctors in England have begun a 6-day strike, the longest in the history of the National Health Service. Doctors are demanding a 35% pay rise after what they claim is more than a decade of real-term pay cuts. Our correspondent Paul Hawkins reports.
60,000 junior doctors in England only are on strike. This is the biggest strike in the NHS's 75-year history, and they are striking fundamentally about pay. They say that since 2008 they've had a 26% real terms pay cut. They want the government to restore that, and then they want mechanisms put in place so that in future they get above inflation pay increases. Now, the government has already offered them given them an 8.8% pay increase last summer. It's offered them, towards the end of last year, it offered them a 3% extra pay increase. The BMA, the British Medical Association, that represents these 60,000 junior doctors, which is about half the doctor workforce in England, said no to that. They've now instigated this 6 days of industrial action, and they are not happy with what the government has put on the table.
After the first pay offer was imposed upon us, the doctor went from £14 an hour to £15 an hour. And again, we're just asking for £21 an hour. And that's what we call pay restoration. So we're not even asking for a pay rise. We're just asking for our pay to go back to what it was worth in 2008.
Another problem that the British Medical Association, the union that represents these junior doctors, says is retention and recruitment. It says that a lot of junior doctors have either gone to or are thinking about going abroad where there is not a labour workforce shortage, there are enough doctors, the systems aren't struggling to cope with demand as they are in the UK, and fundamentally they've got a better paid job and it's properly resourced, and that's something that's been echoed by some of the junior doctors that we've been talking to today.
Sometimes I think like why we have put in all of those years but we have given our youth to this medicine and we are getting nothing for this.
Yeah, so what has it made you think maybe go private or go to another country or?
At least I've been in a number of discussions where people have talked about moving to other countries like Australia, Canada. So it's a real discussion ongoing among staff in the NHS.
Millions of people in England are waiting for operations already. This industrial action isn't going to help, but the doctors say they are going to continue until they get what they want. The government are sticking to their position. The two sides are as far apart as they've ever been. Paul Hawkins, CGTN, London.
The US presidential election cycle is about to step up a gear, with Republican candidates soon to face contests in every state to ultimately choose a nominee. Former President Donald Trump is the outright Republican frontrunner, but his disqualification from the primary ballot in Colorado and Maine makes his candidacy uncertain. Our correspondent Owen Fairclough reports.
Can Donald Trump still run as a candidate in Colorado even after its historic decision to disqualify him from the ballot? The state's Supreme Court ruled that the former president isn't constitutionally eligible to run due to his role in the January the 6th insurrection. But the ruling isn't as straightforward as that, not least for Colorado's top election official.
This is a case that has taken lots of twists and turns. We have expected an appeal from the former president.
Colorado's Republican Party has appealed that decision to the US Supreme Court, while Trump is also expected to file his own appeal. So Colorado's ruling has been effectively postponed until this Thursday, the day before the deadline to be on the ballot for Colorado's March 5th primary, when voters choose their Republican presidential candidate.
I certify the names onto the ballot for the presidential primary this Friday. And so we do hope that the court understands that presidential primaries are rapidly approaching and gives us a definitive answer whether or not the former president is disqualified from the ballot.
So if the Supreme Court declines to take Trump's case or rules in his favor before the first ballots for overseas voters are printed, his name will still be on them. But if the Supreme Court rules after that, those dispatched later for domestic mail or in-person voting might not include Trump, leaving Colorado with two different ballots. That complex scenario is shaping a potentially chaotic presidential election. Trump has also been disqualified in Maine and plans to appeal that decision, while there are similar cases pending in around 10 states, with another 6 having dismissed attempts to stop Trump running. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Well, let's go back now to our main story and that breaking news. Iran says that more than 100 people have been killed in twin blasts in the country's south. We can talk to academic and political analyst Mohammad Marandi, who's in Tehran. Good to see you again, Mohammad. So details clearly still emerging. At this stage, what seems to have happened?
Well, there were two bomb explosions that took place near a ceremony for the 4th anniversary of the murder of General Soleimani, who was murdered by the Americans in Iraq. He was the commander who led the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So, of course, ISIS is extremely hostile towards him, and so one possibility is that ISIS was involved, but also the Israeli regime, because it's trying to expand the war, it may have been involved, and ISIS and Israel may have done this together, because we know that during the dirty war in Syria, ISIS was active alongside the Golan Heights and was being supported by the Israeli regime. So there are links. So at the moment, there are different scenarios. So we don't know what happened.
Clearly too early to say who was behind it, but what might whoever did this have been hoping to achieve?
Well, if it was the Israeli regime, it could be to expand the war. Netanyahu is desperate to continue the war, because if the war does come to an end, he will be put on trial for corruption charges, but also people will attack him for this historic defeat, military defeat in Gaza. So the assassination that we saw yesterday in Beirut and the killing of the Iranian general in Syria last week, alongside this, could possibly be an attempt to expand the war. On the other hand, it could be an attempt by Netanyahu to tell the public that, look, I've killed senior figures in Iran, I've punished Iran, I've killed senior figures in Hamas, I've leveled Gaza, I've carried out a genocide, I won, and that would perhaps help him with his political survival. There are different scenarios, there are different theories, but later on, I'm sure we'll find out what's happened.
So this attack has targeted an event marking the anniversary of the death of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. What do you think is the significance of the timing of this?
It is very important because Israel hated General Soleimani, because General Soleimani supported the Palestinian cause. He supported the resistance against the Israeli regime. But also ISIS hated General Soleimani because when NATO was supporting extremist groups in Syria, including ISIS, the Iranian general was deeply involved in pushing them back. And when ISIS expanded and the spillover of the war in Syria included Iraq, he led a combined campaign against ISIS in Syria and Iran. So both the Israeli regime hates him a lot, and ISIS hates him equally. And again, since Israel and ISIS have had a history of cooperation together, it is quite possible that this was carried out by both of them.
So what do you think this could mean for the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, the Iranians want a ceasefire in Gaza. Over 30,000 people have probably died because many thousands are under rubble and they're not a part of the official numbers. The Iranians want this to end immediately. But if the Israelis escalate, then there will have to be a response, whether by Lebanon for the assassination yesterday or the assassination of the Iranian general, or if today's massacre in the south of Iran had something to do with the Israeli regime. This will ultimately lead to a response. But at the same time, Iran does not want an expanded war, and the region doesn't want an expanded war.
Mohammad
Marandi,
Marandi, I'm afraid we are out of time, but it's great to talk to you. That's the academic Mohammad Marandi. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching.